The hotel lobby was alive with sound and movement, a place where every second seemed to carry importance. Guests came in through the glass doors, dragging their suitcases, their voices blending into the background noise of ringing phones, clinking glasses and footsteps moving quickly across the polished floor. Bright lights reflected on the marble tiles, making the place feel even busier than it was. Everyone had somewhere to go, something to do, and there was no space for hesitation. Daniel, a hotel worker, stood in the middle of it all. He had been working at the hotel for 3 years, and he knew how to handle chaos. His uniform was neatly pressed, his name badge shining under the lights. With a polite smile on his face, he moved from guest to guest, helping with luggage, answering questions, and making sure everyone felt welcomed. His managers often said that Daniel worked like a machine, always on time, never slowing down, and never causing trouble. But Daniel wasn't just doing a job. He cared about people, even if most guests only saw him as another hotel employee. On this day, though, the hotel was busier than usual. A wedding party had filled most of the rooms, and dozens of guests were in the lobby, laughing, talking, and celebrating. Children ran around playing tag between the chairs, while staff hurried to keep everything under control. Daniel felt sweat on his forehead as he carried bags for one family and quickly turned to help an elderly couple find their way to the elevator. His legs were tired, but he didn't slow down. He had learned long ago that in the hotel business, standing still was not an option. Everywhere he looked, people needed something. The receptionist waved at him to assist a guest who was asking about directions. A housekeeper asked him to deliver fresh towels to one of the upper floors. The restaurant staff rushed past with trays of food, whispering about a table that had sent back their order. The entire place was buzzing like a beehive, and Daniel was right in the middle of it. But even in this busy storm, Daniel noticed the little things. He noticed how one guest was struggling with a stroller, and he quickly stepped in to hold the door. He noticed a man dropping his wallet and quietly returned it before the man even realized it was gone. Daniel worked with quiet kindness, never expecting praise. He believed small acts made big differences, even if nobody saw them as the day pushed forward. The air in the lobby grew warmer, filled with the smell of coffee from the cafe corner and the faint perfume of guests passing by. A young couple sat at a table feeding their baby while chatting with relatives. The baby's soft giggles blended with the chatter, adding warmth to the noisy lobby. Daniel walked past them, carrying 2 heavy suitcases, smiling when the baby clapped its hands at him. He loved children and often thought about how innocent and pure they were, even in a world that sometimes felt too harsh. But Daniel didn't have time to think for long. His supervisor, a strict man with sharp eyes, called his name. "Daniel, we need you at the entrance now." Too many guests arriving at once. Daniel nodded quickly, placing the suitcases down for a waiting family and hurrying to the door. His heart pounded as he pushed himself to keep pace with the endless demands of the job. He often told himself that if he worked hard enough, maybe someday he'd be promoted. Maybe he'd finally earn the respect he quietly longed for. The lobby grew louder, the lines at the front desk longer, and guests began to get impatient. Daniel could feel the pressure rising, but he kept moving. He carried luggage, guided guests, and answered questions with the same steady smile he always wore. He was tired, but he told himself it was worth it. He wanted to prove that no matter how busy things became, he could handle it. Still, a strange feeling lingered in his chest. Something was different about this shift. He couldn't explain why, but he felt like all the rushing and noise was leading to something more. He noticed the baby again, sitting in a high chair near the cafe, reaching for food while the parents laughed. The child's little face lit up with joy, completely unaware of the chaos around. Daniel smiled again, but the moment stayed in his mind longer than he expected. The hours dragged on, each one filled with endless tasks. Daniel's hands ached from lifting bags. His feet burned from walking back and forth across the huge lobby, but he pushed through. Guests hardly looked at him as they rushed past, but Daniel didn't mind. He believed his job was about service, not recognition. He told himself, if they're comfortable, then I've done my work right. The busy shift continued, and the hotel seemed to breathe with life, impatient, loud, and unstoppable. To anyone else, it was just another day at a busy hotel. But for Daniel, something was about to change. He didn't know it yet, but before the day ended, he would face a moment that would test not just his skills as a worker, but also his heart. As a human being, the noise, the rushing, the pressure, all of it was building up to that one critical moment. The moment when he would see the baby again, not giggling this time, but fighting for its tiny life. The hotel was alive with laughter, music, and the hum of voices blending together. Families gathered around tables, businessmen typed quickly on laptops, and children played on the shiny floor tiles as their parents tried to keep an eye on them. In one corner of the lobby cafe, a young couple sat with their baby. The mother was chatting with her sister, her hands waving as she told a funny story. The father was scrolling through his phone, occasionally nodding, half listening. The baby, no older than 1 year, was strapped into a high chair, small hands reaching curiously for anything within sight. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The baby giggled and made little noises, clapping tiny hands on the tray. The mother absent-mindedly placed a small piece of bread on the tray for the baby to chew on. She didn't notice how big the piece was. She didn't notice that the child, in its excitement, shoved too much into its mouth at once. The father, distracted by a buzzing notification on his phone, didn't notice either. Daniel, moving quickly with a stack of luggage, happened to pass by. He smiled at the baby, the same baby who had giggled at him earlier. He thought it was just another sweet moment in a long, busy day. But as he turned away, something made him pause. It was faint at first, a sound that didn't belong. In the noisy lobby, it was not laughter, not chatter, not clinking glasses. It was a strange, choking noise. The baby's little hands now slapped the tray, not in play, but in panic. Its face turned red, the mouth open but no sound coming out. The piece of bread had lodged in the child's throat. The baby's wide eyes filled with fear, and the tiny body began to shake. Nobody noticed. The mother was still laughing with her sister, her back half turned. The father was still bent over his phone. Guests walked past, carrying shopping bags, checking into rooms, greeting one another loudly. The choking sound was drowned out by the noise of the crowd. Daniel froze for a moment. He glanced around. Surely someone else saw this, but no. Everyone was too busy. The waiters carried trays without looking at the child. The receptionist dealt with an impatient line of guests. The security guard at the entrance was staring outside at the parked cars. Seconds ticked by, but for the baby, those seconds were heavy, each one pulling it closer to danger. The child's face turned from red to a frightening shade of blue. Its tiny fists pounded against the tray, then weakened as the body struggled for air. Daniel's heart began to race. He felt the world around him slow down, the noise fading in. His ears, he could see only one thing: the baby fighting for breath, the parents still unaware. He shouted in his mind, "Look at your child. Please, someone, look." But nobody did. For Daniel, this was the moment where time seemed to hold its breath. He remembered his training from years ago when the hotel had once offered a short first aid session for employees. He had learned the basics of what to do in emergencies, though most staff had quickly forgotten. But Daniel remembered. He knew that choking could take a life in less than a minute. Still, he hesitated for a split second. His supervisor's voice. Echoed in his head the endless reminders about rules, about not disturbing guests, about focusing only on assigned duties. He knew if he caused a scene, if he ran across the lobby and drew attention, management would not be pleased. Guests might complain, and in hotels. Complaints were dangerous for staff. But another voice shouted louder inside him. That's a child. That's a life. Daniel's feet moved before his thoughts could catch up. He dropped the luggage trolley. With a loud thud, the sound making a few guests turn their heads. His heart pounded in his chest as he rushed toward the cafe corner. His eyes stayed locked on the baby's trembling body, the small hands now clawing at the air. The baby's. Mother finally turned when she heard Daniel's hurried footsteps. Her smile froze as she saw her child's face red, then pale, lips turning blue. Her hands shook and she screamed, "Oh my God, he's choking." The father's phone slipped from his hands as he scrambled up, his face drained of color. Panic erupted around the table. The sister screamed, the mother cried, and the father shook helplessly. Other guests stopped mid-conversation, staring at the scene unfolding in front of them. Some gasped, some whispered, but nobody moved forward. Everyone looked, but nobody acted, except Daniel. His hands shook slightly, but his mind was sharp. He knew there was no time for panic, no time for permission. Every second mattered. He leaned down, unbuckled the baby from the high chair, and gently but quickly lifted the child into his arms. The baby was limp now, the tiny body struggling, a weak wheeze escaping its lips. The room seemed to hold its breath. Glasses stopped clinking. Voices stopped talking. Guests froze, watching the hotel worker clutching a choking baby. For Daniel, everything else disappeared. It was just him and the child in his arms. He didn't think about rules, about guests, or about managers. He thought only of saving a life. And in that moment, as the baby's eyes fluttered, Daniel knew if he didn't act now, it would be too late. Daniel's arms tightened around the baby, its small body jerking weakly as it struggled for air. The sound that came from the child was terrifying, not a cry, not a laugh, but a broken, choking gasp that made Daniel's stomach twist. He knew in that instant that there was no time left to think. Yet, even in this moment of urgency, a storm of thoughts and fears crashed inside his head. He stood frozen for half a second, staring at the child's pale face. The lobby around him was no longer just noise. It had become a wall of eyes. Guests stared, staff whispered, the mother screamed again, and the father shouted for help. The whole world seemed to hold him still, waiting for what he would do next. What if I do it wrong? What if I hurt the baby? The doubt stabbed his mind. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a nurse. He was just a hotel worker, someone who carried bags and opened doors. What if people blamed him instead of thanking him? He thought of his manager's strict voice echoing in his memory. Never create a scene. Never draw attention. Guests first. Service above all. And yet, here he was, holding a life that was slipping away with every passing second. He looked at the parents. Their faces were pale with terror. The mother reached forward, her trembling hands hovering over the baby, but not knowing what to do. The father shouted something, words that broke into panic. Save him. Somebody help. But they were helpless. They had no idea how to stop what was happening. Daniel felt his chest tighten. He realized the baby's life depended on him now. Nobody else was moving. Nobody else was stepping forward. The waiters froze at their stations, unsure. Guests whispered, in shock but stayed rooted to the spot. Even the security guard had stepped forward, then stopped, unsure of what to do. It was all on Daniel. He took a deep breath. His fear didn't vanish, but something stronger rose inside him, a force that pushed him forward. It was the memory of that first aid training he'd once attended. Years ago, when the instructor had said, "One day, you might face a moment where a few seconds could decide whether someone lives or dies. Do not freeze, do not wait, act." That day had arrived. Daniel shifted the baby in his arms, placing the small body against his shoulder. His hands trembled, but his heart beat steady with determination. He had only one thought left: I cannot let this child die in front of me. He bent down slightly, supporting the baby with his arm, and turned the child face down along his forearm. He raised his hand high and delivered a firm pat between the baby's shoulder blades, just as he remembered being taught. The sound of the pat echoed in the silent cafe. 1, 2, 3. His strikes were steady, but careful. The baby's body jerked, but the lodged piece of bread didn't come out. The mother cried louder, her hands clutching at her face. Daniel's heart dropped, but he refused to give up. He quickly turned the baby over, his fingers gently supporting the head. The child's lips were turning darker now, the wheezing weaker. "Come on," Daniel whispered desperately, his voice breaking. "Breathe, little one, breathe." With controlled urgency, he placed the baby against his chest and prepared for the next step. He angled the child slightly, his hand cupped under the jaw, and pressed 2 fingers gently against the chest. His mind replayed the instructions he had learned years ago. Alternate back blows with chest thrusts if the airway is still blocked. He pushed firmly. Once, twice, 3 times. The father dropped to his knees, crying, begging Daniel to save the child. Guests covered their mouths, watching in horror and silence. Every eye in the lobby was locked on this scene. 1 hotel worker, 1 choking baby, and time running out. Daniel pressed again. Then, suddenly, a sound. A weak cough. The baby's chest heaved, and a small piece of bread shot out, landing on the tray of the high chair. The child gasped, coughing hard, tears streaming from tiny eyes. And then, the sound Daniel had been praying for: a cry. A loud, sharp, beautiful cry. The mother screamed with relief and grabbed her baby, holding the child close, sobbing uncontrollably. The father covered his face with his hands, sinking into the chair, shaking with gratitude and shock. Around them, gasps turned into applause. Guests clapped, some shouted "Thank God," and others wiped tears from their eyes. But in the middle of that sudden noise of relief, Daniel just stood there. His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Sweat rolled down his face. His arms felt numb. He had acted on instinct, on memory, on courage he didn't know he had, and he had saved a life. Yet, even as relief filled the room, Daniel's eyes flickered to the hotel desk. His manager stood there, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. There was no smile, no nod of approval, only a cold stare. Daniel's heart sank. He realized that while the guests might cheer, his manager would not. He had broken rules. He had disrupted service. He had caused a scene. And in that quiet moment, as the baby's cries echoed through the lobby, Daniel understood. This was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. For a moment. The lobby was silent, except for the sound of the baby's cry. It was a sharp, desperate wail that cut through the air like a knife, a sound that meant life had returned. Everyone who heard it felt their chest loosen, their fear lift. The baby was breathing again. The danger had passed, but the memory of those few choking seconds left a heavy shadow hanging over the room. The mother clutched her baby tightly, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. She kissed the child's head again and again, whispering broken words. "You're okay. You're okay. Mama's here. You're safe now." Her hands trembled so much that the baby's blanket slipped to the floor, but she didn't care. All she could feel was the weight of her child's tiny body alive against her chest. The father collapsed onto a chair, his face buried in his hands. He shook from head to toe, overwhelmed by guilt and relief. He had been seconds away from losing his child while staring at a phone screen. Now, looking up at Daniel, he felt both shame and gratitude twist together inside him. His lips moved, but the words wouldn't come out. Only a choked, "Thank you, thank you," escaped. Around them, the guests who had been frozen in fear began to move. Some clapped, their applause hesitant at first, but then growing louder. Others whispered to each other, pointing at Daniel with wide eyes, telling the story even as it had just happened. That worker saved the baby. He knew what to do. He didn't even hesitate. A few guests pulled out their phones, recording the scene, eager to share this incredible moment. Daniel stood still, breathing heavily, sweat dampening his shirt. His arms ached from the effort, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on the baby, making sure the child's chest rose and fell, making sure the danger was truly gone. Only when the baby's cries softened into hiccups and quiet sobs did Daniel finally let out the breath he had been holding. He wanted to smile, to feel relief, but instead he felt strangely hollow. The intensity of the moment had drained him. It was as if he had poured out every ounce of energy, every bit of strength, into that single act. He had not thought about himself, his job, or the rules. He had only thought of saving a life. Now that it was over, reality slowly crept back in. The reality came first, in the form of his supervisor's sharp shoes clicking against the marble floor. The manager approached with a stiff posture, his eyes narrowing at Daniel. He didn't look at the baby, nor at the grateful parents. His gaze was locked on Daniel, and his expression was not one of pride, but of annoyance. "Daniel," he said in a cold voice that sliced through the relief in the room, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" The applause around them died quickly. The guests fell quiet again, sensing the shift in mood. The mother stopped rocking her child, looking up with confusion. The father frowned, still holding on to his son. All eyes now shifted from the baby to Daniel, and then to the manager. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? The truth was clear. He had saved the child's life. Everyone had seen it. Yet, in his manager's tone, he heard only disapproval, as though he had spilled a tray of drinks or misplaced a guest's luggage. Daniel's voice faltered. His throat was dry. The baby was choking. "I had to help." The manager's lips pressed tighter. "You caused a scene. You abandoned your duties. Guests come here for service, not for drama. Do you realize the disruption you've just created?" Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief. One woman spoke up, her voice sharp disruption. "That man just saved a child." But the manager ignored her. His attention never left Daniel, who stood rooted to the spot. Inside, Daniel's heart sank. He had known this reaction would come, but he had hoped, just for a moment, that his manager would see the bigger picture, that he would understand that no protocol, no rule, no service mattered more than a child's life. But the cold stare told him otherwise. The mother, clutching her baby, stood up. "Are you serious?" she cried, her voice filled with disbelief and anger. "This man saved my son's life. If not for him, my baby would be." Her voice broke, and she hugged the child closer. "And you're talking about service?" Other guests murmured in agreement. "Unbelievable. How heartless. He's a hero." Phones were still recording, capturing every word. Daniel looked at the ground, his cheeks burning. He hadn't wanted recognition. He hadn't wanted applause. All he had wanted was to help. But now he stood caught between the gratitude of strangers and the cold judgment of his boss. The father walked over, his steps unsteady, and placed a shaking hand on Daniel's shoulder. His eyes glistened with tears. "You saved my child. Never forget this. Never." His voice cracked, but it was full of sincerity. Daniel finally allowed himself a small smile. Not for the praise, but for the sound of the baby's soft breathing in the mother's arms. That was all that mattered to him. Not the rules, not the anger of his boss, not even the whispers around the room. Only that one fragile life that now continued. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. The applause would fade, the shock would pass, but the manager's anger would not. Daniel had crossed a line in the eyes of the hotel's strict rules, and he could feel the consequences waiting like a storm on the horizon. Still, as he stood there, exhausted but steady, Daniel thought only one thing. If I had to do it again, I would. 100 times over. Asterisk the applause that had filled the lobby only moments before began to fade, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. The baby was safe. The parents were still crying with relief, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just about the rescue. It was about what would happen next. The manager, Mr. Collins, stepped forward with a slow, deliberate stride. His shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor, and the sound cut through the lobby like a metronome of authority. His face was tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes like cold steel. To him, the chaos was not about a life saved. It was about order broken. Guests turned to look at him, some still whispering, others holding up their phones to record the unfolding scene. They expected thanks, maybe even a speech praising Daniel's bravery. But as soon as Mr. Collins opened his mouth, they realized they were about to witness something far different. "Daniel," he said, his voice calm but sharp, "step aside." Daniel froze. He had been expecting anger, yes, but the tone still stung. He slowly lowered his gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Sir," he said quietly, "the baby was—" "I know what happened," Mr. Collins interrupted. "And I know what you did. You left your station. You abandoned your duties. You created a disruption in the middle of peak service hours. Do you realize the scene you just caused?" A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd. One guest scoffed loudly. "A scene? He saved that baby." The mother, still clutching her child, turned sharply toward the manager. Her eyes blazed with fury, her voice trembling with outrage. "Are you out of your mind?" "My son could have died. If Daniel hadn't acted, if he had waited even one more minute, my baby would be gone." Mr. Collins didn't flinch. He didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Daniel, as if the rest of the world didn't matter. Rules exist for a reason. Order exists for a reason. If every staff member decided to run around making their own decisions, this hotel would fall into chaos. The father stood now, his face red with anger. Chaos. You call saving a child chaos? You should be thanking this man on your knees. Guests nodded, voices rising. But Mr. Collins ignored them. His focus was absolute. His hotel, his rules, his authority, that was all that mattered to him. Daniel swallowed hard. His hands still shook faintly from the adrenaline of the rescue. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't thought about rules, that he had only thought about saving a life. But every word died on his tongue. He could see it in Mr. Collins's face. The decision had already been made. "I will not discuss this further in front of guests," the manager said firmly. His voice carried the authority of someone who believed he could not be challenged. "Daniel, report to my office after this shift. We'll handle the matter properly." The mother gasped, her voice breaking as she cried out, "Handle the matter? He's a hero. How dare you treat him like this?" The guests began to argue loudly, some calling out in defense of Daniel, others recording every word. A few whispered that they would never stay in a hotel that punished its own staff for saving lives. But Mr. Collins remained calm. His face? A mask of indifference. Daniel stood in the center of it all, feeling the weight of every eye on him. He wasn't used to attention. He wasn't used to being the center of a storm. He wished he could disappear into the background again, just another worker carrying bags and opening doors. But that wasn't possible anymore. The father stepped forward and pointed a trembling finger at the manager. "If you punish this man, I swear, the world will hear about it. Everyone will know what kind of hotel you run. Everyone will know that you care more about rules than lives." For the first time, Mr. Collins's eyes flickered, a small shadow of unease passing over them. He glanced at the phones recording him, at the guests whispering angrily, at the mother holding her child like a shield. But in the next breath, his mask returned. "This conversation is over," he said flatly. He turned and walked away, his shoes clicking again, leaving behind a room filled with gasps, anger, and disbelief. Daniel stood frozen, at ease, heavy. He could still hear the baby's soft hiccups, the sound of life that might have been silenced forever. That sound gave him strength, even as fear of what awaited him in the manager's office clawed at his heart. The mother walked up to him and placed a hand on his arm. Her grip was firm, her eyes fierce. "No matter what he says, you are a hero. Don't you forget that." Daniel gave her a small, tired smile, but inside he felt the storm building. He had done what was right, but in the eyes of the one person who controlled his future, he had broken the rules. And rules, in this hotel, seemed to matter more than human lives. As he looked around at the faces of the guests, he saw both outrage and admiration. People were on his side, but he knew that might not be enough. He could already feel the cold shadow of his manager's decision hanging over him. For Daniel, the rescue had ended. The fight for justice was only beginning. The night after the rescue, the hotel lobby slowly returned to normal. Guests checked in, bags rolled across the floor, and staff hurried about as if nothing had happened. But for Daniel, nothing felt normal anymore. His body was still trembling with exhaustion, his mind replaying the moment when the baby's face turned blue. The moment he had nearly lost the child in his arms. He could still hear the mother's scream, the father's desperate cry, the gasp of relief when the bread finally flew out. Those sounds clung to him like shadows, but mixed with that memory was something darker. The cold stare of his manager, Mr. Collins. While others had called him a hero, Collins had looked at him as though he were a criminal. That image haunted him more than the baby's choking. He knew he had saved a life, but in the hotel's world of strict rules and silent obedience, saving a life was not enough. As the shift came to an end, Daniel's heart grew heavier. The moment he had been dreading arrived. A message came through. The staff intercom. "Daniel, report to the manager's office." His hands went cold as he straightened his uniform, wiped sweat from his brow, and made his way down the long, quiet corridor. Each step echoed like a warning. When he entered the office, Mr. Collins sat behind his desk, the blinds half closed, casting stripes of light and shadow across his sharp face. His hands rested neatly on a folder. He didn't ask Daniel to sit. He didn't even greet him. Instead, he opened the folder, clicked his pen, and spoke with a flat, businesslike tone. "Daniel," he began, "what you did today was reckless. You left your duties, disrupted guests, and created chaos in my lobby. This is unacceptable." Daniel swallowed hard. "Sir, with respect," the baby was choking. "I couldn't just stand there. I had to." Collins raised a hand, cutting him off. "This is not about feelings. This is about rules. We have procedures. We have a standard of service. You are not a doctor. You are not emergency personnel. Your job is to maintain calm, not to cause panic. Daniel clenched his fists at his sides. He wanted to shout, to remind Collins that the baby was alive because of him, that guests had cheered, that parents had wept with gratitude. But he also knew shouting would only seal his fate. He took a deep breath and spoke quietly. I didn't think about rules, sir. I thought about saving a life, and I don't regret it. For the first time, Collins looked up from his folder. His cold eyes studied Daniel as though he were a stain on the hotel's polished floor. Then he signed a paper, set down his pen, and said the words Daniel had feared most. You're terminated. Effective immediately. The words struck Daniel like a blow. His chest tightened, his breath caught. Fired after years of dedication. After countless hours of serving guests, after giving everything to this job, he was being cast out. Not for failure, but for bravery. But, sir, Daniel whispered. His voice cracked. I've worked here for 3 years. I've never been late, never disobeyed orders, never caused trouble. And today, I saved a child's life. How can that be grounds for firing? Collins's expression didn't change. This hotel does not reward disobedience. You broke the chain of command. You brought unnecessary attention to yourself and this establishment. We cannot afford employees who think they know better than the rules. Collect your things and leave your uniform at the front desk. Daniel stood frozen, his legs refusing to move. His ears rang with the words, terminated. Collect your things. Leave. He wanted to scream, to fight, to beg. But he saw in Collins's eyes that nothing would change. The decision had been made long before he stepped into the office. Slowly, he nodded, though his throat burned with unspoken words. Yes, sir. He walked out of the office, his footsteps heavy, his heart heavier still. The long corridor seemed endless, and each step away from the manager's office felt like a step away from the life he had built. When he reached the staff locker room, some of his coworkers looked up. They had heard whispers of what had happened. Some eyes were filled with sympathy, others with fear, but none dared speak. The hotel was a place of silence and obedience. And nobody wanted to be the next Daniel. He removed his neatly pressed uniform for the last time. As he folded it and placed it on the bench, his hands shook. He remembered the nights he had ironed it carefully, the mornings he had worn it with pride. Now it felt like a costume he had been forced to shed, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Carrying a small bag of his belongings, Daniel walked out through the staff exit into the cool night air. The city lights glittered beyond the hotel, but they brought him no comfort. His chest ached with loss, not of a job alone, but of dignity, of justice. He had given everything to the hotel, and in the moment he had proven himself most human. He had been discarded like nothing. Yet, as he walked into the night, the memory of the baby's cry echoed in his ears. That sound reminded him that he had done the right thing. Even if the hotel saw him as a problem, even if his manager saw him as disobedient, he knew the truth. He had been there when it mattered. He had chosen life over rules. He was no longer a hotel worker. He was unemployed, uncertain of what came next. But deep inside, a small flame of pride burned. He had acted when no one else did, and no matter what consequences followed, he knew he would never regret that choice. Still, as the hotel lights faded behind him, Daniel could not shake the heavy question that now loomed over him. What happens to those who do the right thing when the world punishes them for it? The night after Daniel was fired, he walked home with heavy steps, unsure of what his future would hold. He didn't know that the moment he stepped out of the hotel doors, another story was beginning, one he had no control over. Inside the lobby, while Daniel had been dragged to the manager's office, many guests had still been buzzing with shock and outrage. Several had captured the entire incident on their phones. The choking baby, Daniel's desperate rescue, the applause of relief. And then, most importantly, the cold reaction of Mr. Collins, the manager's harsh words, his threats, and the announcement that Daniel had caused a disruption had all been recorded clearly that night. As guests returned to their rooms, many uploaded the videos online. On social media, the story spread like wildfire. Headlines began appearing within hours. Hotel worker saves baby, gets fired for heroism. Hero or rule breaker. Hotel punishes man who chose humanity over protocol, unbelievable. Baby saved, rescuer punished. By morning, the videos had gone viral. Millions of people watched in disbelief as the footage played. The baby choking, Daniel acting quickly. The cries of relief when the child was saved, and then the cold words of the manager echoing across the lobby. You caused a scene. The internet erupted with anger. Comments flooded in. How could anyone fire a man for saving a child? This hotel should be ashamed of itself. Daniel is a hero. Period. If that were my baby, I'd build a statue for him. Journalists picked up the story. News outlets ran interviews with witnesses who had been there. A guest who had filmed the rescue told a reporter, "I saw it with my own eyes. That baby was seconds away from dying. Daniel didn't hesitate. He saved a life, and the manager treated him like dirt." The baby's parents, still shaken but deeply grateful, also spoke out. The mother, holding her child close during a television interview, said tearfully, "If not for Daniel, my son wouldn't be here today. He risked his job for a stranger's child. Can anyone call that wrong?" Her words struck a chord with millions watching. People began calling Daniel a true hero, an ordinary man who chose humanity over rules. Online petitions appeared demanding justice, urging the hotel to reinstate him and issue a public apology. Hashtags trended worldwide. Hashtag justice for Daniel. Hashtag hero not fired. Hashtag humanity first. Meanwhile, hotel's official page was bombarded with angry reviews. Thousands of one-star ratings poured in overnight. Guests canceled bookings, writing comments like, "We will never stay in a hotel that punishes heroes." Others threatened boycotts until Daniel was given his job back. Inside the hotel, chaos brewed. Staff whispered nervously in the hallways, afraid of speaking too loudly. They had seen the news too. Some felt proud of Daniel, others terrified of Collins's reaction, but one thing was clear. The hotel's reputation was crumbling fast for Daniel. However, the sudden storm was overwhelming. He sat in his small apartment, staring at his phone as message after message poured in. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He had never been the center of attention in his life. But now, people from across the world were sending him words of encouragement. "You did the right thing, Daniel. Don't let them silence you. We need more people like you in this world." Still, he struggled to believe it. He wasn't used to praise. He wasn't used to being called a hero. In his heart, he didn't feel like one. He had only done what anyone should do. But as he read the messages, he realized not everyone would have acted as he did. Some would have hesitated. Some would have followed the rules. He hadn't, and that made all the difference. Outside, cameras began to appear near his building. Reporters wanted interviews. Neighbors wanted to shake his hand. People he had never met before thanked him in the street. Some even offered him jobs, saying their businesses needed men like him. Meanwhile, the hotel tried to defend itself. A spokesperson released a cold statement. "While we appreciate the employees' quick response, staff are expected to follow protocol at all times to ensure guest safety and order." Unfortunately, in this case, protocol was not followed. But the statement only made things worse. The public saw it as arrogance, proof that the hotel valued rules above humanity. The outrage grew louder. Some demanded the resignation of the manager, others demanded compensation for Daniel. The father of the baby wrote an open letter online. His words spread just as fast as the videos. "Daniel saved my child's life." The hotel punished him for it. If this is what rules mean, then the world needs fewer rules and more people like him. That letter was shared millions of times. It was read on news programs, quoted in newspapers, repeated in conversations across the country. It turned the public's anger into a movement. Daniel, sitting quietly in his small living room, could hardly believe what was happening. He had lost his job, yes. He had been humiliated, yes. But he had also become something he never imagined. A symbol of courage, of humanity, of choosing what is right even when it costs everything. And though he still felt the sting of unfairness, though he still carried the weight of being cast out, he also felt something new, a growing hope. The world had seen him. The world had spoken for him. He was no longer just a hotel worker. He was Daniel, the man who had saved a baby's life. And this was only the beginning. Asterisk, the storm of public outrage did not fade. Each day, Daniel's story spread further, carried by news anchors, online writers, and millions of ordinary people who felt inspired by what he had done. Everywhere, people repeated the same message. A man had been punished for saving a baby. It was a story so shocking, so unfair, that it stirred something deep inside people's anger. Yes, but also hope. Hope that humanity still existed, even in the harshest of places. For Daniel, life had changed completely. Just a week ago, he had been invisible. Another hotel worker in a neat uniform, blending into the background. Guests had walked past him without noticing. Managers had barked orders without thanks, and he had carried luggage like it was the only purpose he had. But now, people stopped him on the street. They called him the hero hotel worker. They shook his hand, asked for pictures, and told him that his courage had given them faith in humanity again. At first, Daniel felt uncomfortable. He wasn't used to attention. He kept telling people, "I'm not a hero. I just did what anyone should do." But the world disagreed. To them, he was proof that kindness still existed in a world that often chose rules, money, and order over people's lives. The baby's parents never left his side. They invited him into their home, introduced him to their family, and treated him as one of their own. The mother often cried when she looked at him, whispering, "Because of you, my son is still here." The father promised, "You'll never be alone again. Not after what you did for us." Meanwhile, the hotel that had fired him continued to sink under the weight of its arrogance. Guests canceled bookings in waves. Investors pulled out, and within weeks, the once proud building stood half empty. Mr. Collins, the manager who had humiliated Daniel, became the focus of the public's anger. His cold words, "You caused," a scene replayed endlessly on the internet, turning him into a symbol of everything wrong with heartless corporate thinking. Soon, the hotel's board had no choice. Collins was removed from his position, his career shattered by his own cruelty. But while the hotel crumbled, Daniel's life began to rebuild in unexpected ways. Offers of work came from every corner. Restaurants wanted him as a manager. Charities wanted him as a spokesperson. Schools wanted him to teach children about courage and first aid. Even hospitals reached out, offering to sponsor training so he could become a paramedic if he wished. Still, Daniel didn't rush into anything. He spent his days quietly, walking through the park, reading messages from strangers online, and thinking about what had happened. He had been punished for doing the right thing, yet the punishment had turned into something far greater. He had lost his job, but he had gained something more valuable: the respect of millions, and the knowledge that his actions had meant the difference between life and death. One afternoon, he was invited to a local community event. He almost didn't go. He didn't like the idea of standing in front of crowds. But when he arrived, he saw dozens of families gathered, many with small children. They held up signs that read, "Thank you, Daniel." The baby he had saved was there too, healthy and smiling in his mother's arms. When Daniel stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into cheers. He raised his hands nervously, his cheeks red, his heart racing. He didn't prepare a speech. He wasn't a man of fancy words. He simply said what was in his heart. "I didn't think about rules that day. I didn't think about myself. I only thought about a baby who needed help. Anyone in my place should have done the same. If you see someone in need, don't look away. Don't wait for permission. Just do what's right." Because sometimes one small act of courage can change everything. The crowd roared with applause. Parents cried, children clapped, and strangers embraced one another. In that moment, Daniel's words became more than just a story. They became a message carried into countless homes, schools, and workplaces. From then on, Daniel's life was never the same. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, but he was something far greater, an example. His story was taught in classrooms, shared in training seminars, told around dinner tables. He had become a symbol that rules and jobs were temporary, but humanity was forever. The baby he saved grew up hearing the story of the man who chose to care when no one else moved. And each time Daniel visited the family, the child would smile and cling to him, as though sensing the bond that had been forged in that moment of crisis. Years later, when people looked back on the event, they remembered two things. They remembered the hotel that chose rules over life, and they remembered Daniel, the man who proved that compassion matters more than protocol. The hotel's name faded with time, but Daniel's story remained, passed down as a reminder that courage can come from the most ordinary people. Daniel himself never sought fame. He lived quietly, worked humbly, and kept the same gentle smile he always had. But wherever he went, people recognized him. They whispered his story to their children. They said, "That's the man who saved a baby. That's the man who stood up for what's right." And though Daniel never called himself a hero, the world did. His legacy was not written in books or carved in statues. It was written in the lives he touched, in the courage he inspired, and in the reminder that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, but it is always worth it. Because Daniel's choice that day proved one truth: no rule could erase. Humanity will always matter more than service. Asterisk.